you. Good evening, everybody. Again, I'm Rachel. I'm one of the brand new board members, and I have the pleasure of introducing Justin Bloom. He's actually the founder of Suncoast Waterkeeper. He earned his Juris Doctorate at Tulane Law School and has been a practicing environmental attorney, specializing in prosecuting pollution cases and representing communities for over 18 years. So today he's going to give us a tour through our local waterways to discover how Suncoast Waterkeeper protects and restores our waterways. So Justin, I'm going to pass it off to you.
Great, thanks Rachel and Aaron. Really glad to speak with folks today. I think Aaron mentioned to put your questions in the chat, but I really don't mind being interrupted. And so maybe I'll try to keep an eye on the chat as well. But if someone's monitoring it and you see a question that's really pertinent, just flag me or let me know. It's a pretty small group, so I love having a conversation with you all. I'm familiar. I know a couple people on the Zoom call, and nice to see some friendly names. And I thought maybe I would just tell you folks a little bit about Suncoast Waterkeeper for those of you folks that don't know, and the kinds of work we do, and the kind of work that waterkeepers do in the state and elsewhere. And then kind of talk about the issues that we're addressing here locally. And we focus on Sarasota and Manatee counties, but I'm on the board of the Tampa Bay Waterkeeper as well as we are been creating a Peace Myakka Waterkeeper program that I sit on the board of as well. So I'm an environmental lawyer, and my focus is litigating environmental cases, but I've also been for decades working on environmental issues and supporting nonprofit organizations, mainly in campaigns and not just suing folks. I, for many years, I have a long relationship with the area. My grandparents retired to Anna Maria in the 70s, and I kind of grew up gunking around in the mangroves out on Anna Maria, and that's kind of where I think the fire got lit a bit. My mom, who's no longer with us, was really cool, and we'd be kayaking or paddling around mangroves. And I remember this one incident where we waded in through some mangroves and we're exploring and saw basically a clear cut, and lots of stakes, lots of ribbons. It was, a development right in the mangroves. And my mom she's pretty mild-mannered. She never cursed, and she grew up like, around the Woodstock era, but she wasn't like a hippie. She's kind of more like the cheerleader. But without a word, the two of us looked at each other and we just started walking around, pulling up stakes and chopping down ribbons. And she kind of really supported that spark in me to be an environmental fighter. And I kind of tell that story with some pride, but at the same time, I'm not a monkey wrencher. I kind of figured out to hone my skills, and after being an environmentalist for many years, I think it was at New College in the 80s where there was this battle that we were fighting over the grove of oak trees that was separated New College from the airport. And we were faced with losing pretty much that entire grove. And while the other kids were chaining themselves to trees, I kind of started working with the legal team that was working on looking for some way to maybe stop it through the courts. And that experience, we ended up losing, but in the end, we got a bunch of money to mitigate and did native plantings all throughout the New College campus, and kind of turned something bad into something good. And that kind of got me on the path of pursuing environmental law instead of following my more monkey wrenching desires. So I've been working on environmental issues for a long time. A lot of that time has been in Florida, but I lived up in New York for a long time and in New Orleans where I went to law school. But during that kind of journey, I started working for the Hudson Riverkeeper in New York on the Hudson River about 20 years ago. And so maybe I kind of thought I'd take that as a way of telling the story a little bit about waterkeepers and Suncoast Waterkeeper. And it's a cool story, and we have some time. I won't take too long on it. It kind of is the story of the birth of the environmental movement, and the impacts of the Industrial Revolution, particularly like in the Northwest, where or the Northeast, in industrialized cities throughout the country. And you guys, I'm sure, have heard stories of the Cuyahoga River catching on fire. The experience was similar in and around New York City, and the Hudson River was one of the most industrialized waterways. And the pollution got so bad that we're talking maybe in the late 60s, 70s, the traditional fishing community there was a shad fishery, could not bring home enough fish to feed their families. They couldn't earn a living doing what their fathers and their grandparents and families had been doing for generations. And a lot of these guys were like Korean War vets, Vietnam War veterans, and were tough dudes. And they couldn't figure out how to deal with the situation. So they, kind of like me when I was a kid and turned to monkey wrenching, they hatched a plan to soak up a mattress full of kerosene and stick it into the outfall pipe of the local GM plant in Tarrytown to blow it up. Because I mean, they could tell what color they were painting pickup trucks at the Tarrytown plant by the color of the fish that they were pulling into their nets, and they'd had enough. And so around the same time that they were planning, civil disobedience and vandalism, things like that, we were starting to see the emergence of environmental laws and the environmental movement. And they connected with some folks down in New York City, and particularly some environmental lawyers, and they started using kind of novel ways of addressing pollution, particularly water pollution I'm talking about. And they started bringing some of the first actions of finding like laws that were on the books from the early 1800s and 1700s that made it illegal to pollute waterways, and they were successful. And some of those laws and their interpretations of them and their actions led to the development of these foundational environmental laws that are they're the foundation of our environmental protections today, the Clean Water Act mainly, which is the law that I've been working with a lot, and the Clean Air Act, the National Environmental Protection Act. And so they started like really getting creative and being very successful. And from that grew this organization called the Hudson River Fishermen's Association that turned into the first riverkeeper, the Hudson Riverkeeper. And that then became the Waterkeeper Alliance.
About what year was that?
In 1999 was
okay.
the advent of the Waterkeeper Alliance. And the Waterkeeper Alliance, basically at that point, the Hudson Riverkeeper was the first, and then there were 9. They had the Long Island Sound Keeper, the New Jersey, New York Harbor Keeper, the San Francisco Bay Keeper, Puget Sound Keeper. They created the Waterkeeper Alliance, which has been incredibly successful. So there are now over 350 waterkeeper programs around the world, and they're all related and similar in the sense that they're all separate nonprofit and organizations that have the principle of like protecting a local waterway. So like the Hudson Riverkeeper down here, the Suncoast Waterkeeper, which is the coastal waterways of Manatee and Sarasota County. There are lake keepers, there are coast keepers, lots of river keepers, bay keepers. And the principle is like work with the tools at your disposal in the community that you live in to protect your local water resources. And critically, you're also protecting the communities that rely on those waterways. And so different waterkeepers around the country and around the world have different approaches, but they're all very same in that respect. And they all rely on their own communities to raise money. And the one thing that I would say also flows throughout them is that I think, stand out as being fairly fierce advocates. Maybe fierce isn't the right word, but we're advocates, and we, when we need to, we file lawsuits. Our positions are based in science, and we stand firm for those, and we're not afraid to share our positions, because we are not reliant on government grants. We don't take polluter money. We're a grassroots. When I say we, I'm talking really about Suncoast Waterkeeper, but it's just your typical waterkeeper is more of a grassroots type community with a broad membership that stands up to polluters. So I think it's a great model, and I've been involved in this movement for a long time. I ended up working for the Waterkeeper Alliance for a few years before moving back to Sarasota and starting the Suncoast Waterkeeper about, I guess now 11 years ago. And so, you know, I thought that the Suncoast Waterkeeper, because I've been working with waterkeepers around the country, like in Louisiana, like Cancer Alley, some terribly, horribly polluted waterways. And I look at, you know, at home, I'm like, this is going to be a cakewalk with this beautiful estuaries. And a lot of what I'm going to talk about today is some of you are familiar with, but I think a lot of folks are really coming to realize is that these are really imperiled waterways. There are a lot of complicated issues. We've been very busy in dealing with them and trying to protect these waterways from slipping. So I thought that there's a need for a waterkeeper down here, and started that journey about 11 years ago. And we've been very successful with some kind of high profile cases. We've been able to do it with just volunteers. For a short time, we had an executive director, but for the most part, it's been you know, a really strong working board of directors that's generally evenly split between Sarasota and Manatee counties, and some volunteers, and a lot of hard work. We're really right now, and we're funded mainly by members and by some individual donors. We do some small grants, typically $3,000 or $4,000. I'll talk about some of the projects that we do, but we are kind of fleet of foot and able to be reactive. And I hope that in the months to come, we'll be able to be a lot more proactive, because we're about to hire an executive director who's a professional. And I think that's really going to take the organization to the next level, to where we'll be able to leverage what we've done and work more with volunteers, folks like you, on some of these initiatives. So some of the work that we've done, I think we, particularly in Manatee County, our early years were I think dominated by reactive development fights. We were fighting against Carlos Baruf for years as he proposed to overdevelop Longbar Point. We were fighting against Pat Neal against the waterfront proposed development. And so our initial battles were really more very difficult development battles in Manatee County, where I think we have, you know, comparing the two counties, a lot more at risk. You know, we've developed most of Sarasota County and hardened almost all the shorelines, but in Manatee County, there's still a lot of beautiful waterfront, beautiful native habitat, and Longbar Point is a great example of like the last remaining significant mangrove fringe in Manatee County, or in all Sarasota Bay. And we were faced with a proposed development that would have, I think, decimated not only that area, Longbar Point, and dredged a new marina and a channel all the way out to the intercoastal. We think that the impact of that would have been really severe and significant, but we were defending more than that coastline. We were defending an effort by a developer to fundamentally change the comprehensive plan, which is like the constitution of Manatee County, which has enshrined in it certain coastal and development protections. And so this development team was trying to do away with some of those environmental protections, which would have had impacts throughout Manatee County, and I think beyond, because it would have been a precedent for campaigns elsewhere. And so, that was a big battle, and I think it was pretty popular in Manatee County. We were successful in fighting back and a lot of the proposed development, but we never thought we were going to stop development, and typically that's not really our goal, to stop all development. But where there's inappropriate development that's being pushed through, arguably illegally, we fight to make sure that development is reasonable and that they follow the rules. And one of the big problems that we have had all along is that, it's unfortunately left to groups like Suncoast Waterkeeper and Minnesota 88. We work with Sierra Club, and there are other, we're not unique, but that we're forced to have to do this because of the failure at the state level and the federal level to adequately regulate and enforce environmental laws. So those were some of the early cases. And in the last several years, we've been dealing more with bringing federal Clean Water Act enforcement cases against significant polluters. And those have mainly been municipalities. We've also kind of evolved in our understanding of the main threats to our local waterways. And, while development poses death by a lot of cuts of particular areas of the habitat, when looking at what's happening in this area and in Sarasota Bay, the larger threat to the estuary is too much nitrogen. And so we looked at kind of some of the key kind of low-hanging fruit of where's all this nitrogen coming from. And this is something hopefully we'll talk about a little bit more because you guys get it. I mean, one of the things I keep on telling groups and people is plant native, plant Florida friendly. Stormwater pollution is probably most responsible for the excess nitrogen that is polluting our bays, but there's a less and less, because we've been successful. We started looking to municipalities that were failing to adequately collect and treat sewage. So wastewater treatment and sewage systems were obviously failing throughout this region. And starting, I think 7 years ago, we started bringing cases, first with the city of St. Petersburg, which was responsible in one summer for more than half of the sewage polluted by volume throughout the entire state. Because they, like many communities around here, had an aging infrastructure, an old sewage treatment system and plant that was being mismanaged, and they were not adequately investing and reinvesting in that critical environmental infrastructure. And the result was hundreds of millions of gallons of raw sewage or partially treated sewage that was going off into local waterways. And we all know sewage is bad in waterways, but we learned of the critical human health hazards, for one, but also the impact that was having on the estuary, combined with many other sources of nitrogen pollution. We were seeing, as we have been seeing for the past many years, very significant declines in seagrass populations in our 3 connected adjacent estuaries: the Tampa Bay estuary, Sarasota estuary, and the Charlotte Harbor estuary. We're seeing massive seagrass losses. And the seagrass losses are kind of like an indicator species, like the spotted owl in the Pacific Northwest. They are critically important, like the foundation of the habitat for all the commercial fish, the critters that we rely on, and that we all enjoy, and they are essential to the water quality that we have been able to enjoy in our estuaries. And just to kind of I'm going back and forth, but to step back about water quality in this area, I mean, this region kind of crashed back in the 70s when I was talking about the Cuyahoga River and the industrial Northeast and the Hudson River, maybe some areas where folks on this call came from. We were seeing these dramatic declines in water quality. which led to kind of the advent of the Clean Water Act, which the goal was to like turn it around really quickly and to have fishable, swimmable, drinkable waters within like a handful of years. And we're talking about back in 1971, and now it's 50 years later, and we just made so little progress. But in Tampa Bay, in Sarasota Bay, we really did make a lot of progress from a crash back in the 70s. With the advent of these environmental laws, with modern sewage treatment and technology and investment, we saw this amazing recovery in our estuaries. And the way that we really measure that has been through these seagrass meadows and their productivity. All was getting better and better and better until we've been seeing a decline. And and decline is pretty dramatic. I mess up these numbers, but we're looking at like between 15 and 25% reductions in seagrass coverage between the Tampa, Sarasota, and Charlotte estuaries. It's hugely concerning. And so we, I mean, why we're doing this is we're really afraid that the current management regime is not up for it, with their kind of failure to enforce environmental laws, the failure to adequately regulate against this type of pollution. So we bring actions to force polluters to reduce the pollution going into these waterways, because we're afraid that, we look across the state at the Indian River Lagoon, and that's the story of very similar of how that estuary flipped. It crashed. It sustained beautiful seagrass meadows and thriving wildlife and manatee populations. And that's what I think a lot of people hear about in the news now, is that the manatees are starving. Well, their primary food source nearly disappeared in the Indian River Lagoon because of excess nitrogen pollution. And now that lagoon is not a seagrass based estuary. It's a macroalgae is dominant there, and it's much less productive. It's much poorer habitat. It doesn't sustain obviously manatees or many of the other critters that we come to enjoy here. We don't want that to happen here in our estuaries. So these lawsuits have been very successful. The Clean Water Act is a powerful tool. Fortunately, I have a lot of experience in bringing citizen suit enforcement actions. Unfortunately, with the city of St. Petersburg, we had to fight that lawsuit for, I think it was almost 4 years, with really heavy litigation. They fought bitterly, and ultimately we were successful. And then in our subsequent actions, we also got really good case law, and really kind of taught them a lesson in the courts as well. We brought a case against nearby city of Gulfport. Then we brought a major action against Sarasota County, which hopefully some folks have heard about, where they were discharging over the course of, I think it was almost 9 years, they released almost 1 billion gallons of partially treated wastewater from their main sewage treatment plant into Philippi Creek, which leads down to Sarasota Bay. Highly nitrogenated water that contributed to these declining conditions, and nobody really knew about it. And I kind of got into the weeds and studying it because I was litigating the St. Pete case and decided to look in my backyard and discovered this. And we brought a case that I think this is kind of a good story of this type of advocacy and how it's successful. Sarasota County, their approach, rather than fight it, was to kind of acknowledge and focus on fixing the problem. So we really didn't litigate that for very long. Sarasota County committed to fixing the problem and then went above and beyond that. And I'm kind of a cheerleader about the Sarasota County's response to this. There are lots of other issues and problems with the way that Sarasota County government operates or fails to regulate growth and environmental issues, but they did the right thing when it came to their wastewater system. And they committed to what we call advanced wastewater treatment, which was converting all of their wastewater treatment plants to a very a technology that removes very high percentage of the pollutants. And they're moving forward. So that was a really successful case. And then we did the same thing with the city of Largo. And now we are in the course of trying to settle a case that we brought several months ago against the city of Bradenton for their sewage system, which has been discharging millions and millions of gallons of for the most part, raw sewage into the Manatee River every year. And the problem is that the infrastructure is old and has come into a state of disrepair. And in the summer, when we have these intense rainfalls, the sewage system is leaky. It has holes from manholes and roots and trucks that have bounced down the road and made cracks in the infrastructure. And all the stormwater goes into the sewage system and overwhelms it. So there's nowhere for the sewage to go, and it comes out manholes. And when it gets down to the sewage treatment plant, they basically, when there's too much stormwater, they open up the gates and send it out into Manatee River. I think 13 million gallons were sent into Manatee River over the course of like 2 days this past summer. So we brought a lawsuit against the city, and they also, to their credit, they really acknowledge that they've underinvested in their sewage system, and we've been working really hard with them to fix the problems. So it's pretty proven and successful, though, unfortunately, we, have to bring these lawsuits. And so we're about 7:30. I'll talk about a couple other cases that we're working on. The main one that folks have probably heard about is Piney Point, and I can maybe give an update about that and where we're at with Piney Point. So we saw in the spring the release of gosh, my numbers, 115 million gallons of polluted wastewater from the stacks at Piney Point into lower Tampa Bay. And I think it was 210 million gallons, just vast amounts of polluted wastewater to avoid a catastrophic release. Piney Point has been on our radar, everybody's radar, for decades. It has been a looming disaster that finally got to the point where it looked like the stacks were coming down. And the state authorized and developed a plan to release some of the pressure from the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of more millions of gallons of wastewater in these stacks at Port Manatee, to relieve some of the pressure by dumping it into the bay, which I think was the right thing to do at the time, although the time was 10, 15 years ago to deal with the problem, and they let it slide until now. And as a result of that release, we saw the worst red tide and fish kills that we've seen in Tampa Bay since the bad times that I was describing earlier back in the 70s. And so there haven't been any releases since then, but we are in the midst of a significant lawsuit to try to make sure that Piney Point is closed forever, properly closed, and that the pollution is remediated as well. And also importantly, our goals with Piney Point in the lawsuit that we brought is to seek accountability. I think this is a story of the state of Florida, and I think the blame is squarely on the state's shoulders more than everybody else to fail to adequately regulate the potential catastrophe and the pollution at Piney Point, reaching back into the 80s and 90s. It's been a terrible story, and it passes, one administration or another, Democrats and Republicans. It's just been a terrible failure. Our lawsuit was against the state of Florida, the Department of Environmental Protection, the owner of the site, which is really just a real estate interest, as well as the Manatee County Port Authority, which played an important role, because I think that the trigger for what resulted in these discharges was an idea which makes sense when you hear it. They were doing a berth expansion at Port Manatee and wanted to dredge to allow for more commerce and another shipping berth. And someone came up with the idea to take all that dredge spoil and sediment and just truck it across or pump it across the road to these big gyp stacks that had, whole capacity. So instead, drain the lake and put in all this sediment. And the Army Corps of Engineers said that is just a terrible idea. Don't do it. These are unengineered, massive structures of hazardous waste. The waste from phosphogypsum production, which contains heavy metals, incredibly high amounts of nutrients, but toxic heavy metals and radionucleotides. And the Army Corps of Engineers warned the county, warned the state, and they didn't want to hear it. And they went forward with it anyway, knowing that the liners that were supposed to protect the polluted sediments and gyp stacks and make a barrier between that and the dredged sediment and all the polluted wastewater, that the liners were flawed, and they knew it at the time. And pumping all the dredge spoil from the port only made it worse and made it breach. So accountability is an important aspect of this lawsuit. Where we are in the lawsuit is just last week, we were before a federal judge arguing against the defendants' motions to dismiss. All the defendants filed their motions to dismiss the case, trying to basically kick us out of the lawsuit. So we argued that in front of the judge, and now we have to wait and see. These are motions that we totally anticipated, and then all federal litigation is just part of the kind of the game. We have to survive these motions to dismiss. If we succeed, then we'll be able to do our own discovery, be able to get on site to determine how much pollution is really there, and importantly, whether or not the plan which is being effectuated right now to get rid of all the pollution really is as dangerous as we fear. That plan is spearheaded by Manatee County, which is in the process of constructing an injection well right next to Piney Point, where they would seek to inject all of the remaining polluted wastewater. Over the course, it would take probably, I think, 50 years to inject the remaining, because each year more and more stormwater mixes with all these polluted, all the processed water, which is highly polluted. So their plan is to take this wastewater, which we believe is hazardous waste, and dump it into a well, which, if it is hazardous waste, which is a term of law, it's illegal. It's clearly illegal. But they're saying that it's not hazardous waste, and but we can't really get on site to make an independent determination of the constituencies of the pollutants in the wastewater. They've kind of cherry picked their samples here and there, but we believe that there's a lot of dangerous pollution there that we think would be potentially really dangerous to put into the aquifer, even though it would be the deep aquifer. We're not comfortable with their assurances that where they're planning to inject this wastewater will not have any impact on our drinking water aquifers. So it's kind of, I think, a high stakes case. At the same time, we're all concerned about what's going to happen next summer, where hopefully worried that we're going to have the same problems with pressure on these gyp stacks from significant rainfall. They've been trying to drain them off as much as they can, but rainy season's coming, and hopefully we'll be able to get through rainy season again. We've got 20 minutes left. The last thing I wanted to chat about, well, a couple things. One is we don't just sue people. We've been doing our own monitoring. We have a monitoring program where we do water sampling in coordination with the folks at the National Estuary Program and other scientific efforts that are underway, not so that we don't duplicate any efforts, but we're sampling for bacteria that would be indicative of sewage, and we're also doing nutrient sampling in coordination with the National Estuary Program. We hope to kind of expand on that project, again, as we hope to grow our capacity. It's fairly limited now. Our bacteria sampling is we focus on areas, it's very much like the Healthy Beaches program, where the Department of Health goes out and samples popular beaches on the Gulf. We're doing the same thing, but where we know folks in our community like to recreate in the bays, whether they're wading or fishing or paddling. We go to areas back in the estuary and sample for polluted water that is indicative of potentially sewage spills. And let me just close my window. It sounds like there's a raccoon fight going on in the tree right next to me. So the last thing I wanted to mention is a kind of a looming threat of a potential fish farm off the coast of Sarasota that has not been in the news for a while, but there is a proposal to establish a fish farm that's been permitted for about 40 miles offshore from Sarasota, right where red tide typically originates. So they're going to have fish pens with finfish that they would then bring to market. The problem with this project, which we oppose, is it's not a philosophical problem with aquaculture. In fact, we really support aquaculture, particularly like bivalve production in nearshore waters, which is proven and actually has potentially additional benefits of filtering polluted water. This project really has not had the types of environmental reviews which we think are necessary so that we have the comfort level that it's going to be protective of our coastal waterways. It's a pilot project. It's not very large, but it is being pushed forward in a vacuum where there is really no regulatory regime to get a grasp on the potential impacts from not just this project, but if this project gets permitted, they will scale up and there will be a proliferation of fish farms like it all up and down the coast that cumulatively could have major impacts on our coastal waterways. So we think that the process is really flawed of how these permits are being approved. And so we intend to, if they go forward, the EPA currently is reviewing a challenge that we asked them to reconsider the permit under the new administration. And we've been waiting for a couple months now for their ruling. If they allow it to move forward, we will litigate that because we think it's a significant threat and that there needs to be adequate environmental reviews before a project like this goes forward. But it's in the middle of a really big debate around the world of, we need to feed growing populations. And, a lot of people will be angry at us for putting the brakes on a project like this, but we think it's the right thing to do for our community to make sure that if this project goes forward, that there is a lot more review of the potential impacts. So it's about 1:15, and I thought maybe I'd take a pause and see if folks want to chat, have some questions. I've just opened up the chat box. Thanks, Allison just kind of clarified the 18% decline in Sarasota. And then, Charlotte had the highest percentages, and then also really high percentages up in Tampa Bay. And these studies were done prior to the Piney Point spill and the fish kill after that. Am I good at Kathy? Hi. Are you going to support the state constitution amendment about clean water and waterways? It's like we're not sure what it's going to look like. So I'm not sure which. Are there? I thought
they're redesigning the amendment at this moment. It isn't fully formed, the language. But it's the same type of an amendment as the one that passed in Orange County.
That, yeah, like the Wakaiba. Yeah, I mean, I think we support that. It's kind of the rights of waterways and provides arguably a way to bring an action in the name of a waterway to protect it. There's, when talking to bunches of lawyers, they seem to think that it really doesn't provide anything more than it already exists on the books. So I'm a little skeptical of it, but I'm excited about all the energy behind it and need to kind of keep track of what's going on with it.
Well, I'll get in touch with you when it gets to the point it's ready for release, because I'm one of the ambassadors for it.
Okay.
Okay.
Great. So what does it mean when? I'm not sure. This is a kind of a question straight to me, with a question of what it means for us working with them when we sued Sarasota Wastewater. I'm not sure. Maybe I misspoke. We sued the county. We ultimately settled the litigation and are maybe halfway through, if that. I think it was a 6-year. In the settlement, we are still under the jurisdiction of the court. They have 6 years to comply with the terms of our settlement, which are set forth like all these milestones of how they need to actually fix their wastewater system. And so every year we're doing compliance monitoring of Sarasota County and how they're complying with the settlement. And they've generally been doing a pretty good job.
Are they required? I'm sorry, I was the one who asked that question. Are they required to monitor themselves? Are they required to audit themselves as to their performance and to report to the public so that, I mean, it just seems like we see a lot of spills, listed in the paper, in the news on a regular basis. Right. And it's like it becomes every day.
Yeah, well, part of that is like part of our settlement is that they had to do more to identify these spills and to let the public know. So they're doing enhanced reporting yeah. On their website and also, to the public. I would say that every wastewater system is going to have spills. In Sarasota County's spills, I think there have been some significant ones. They're all recorded. They all go to a database in the state. And one thing about our case against them was every spill that they have moving forward, and this has been now, I think 2 years ago that we've been past the litigation, there are what we call stipulated penalties as an incentive for them to do a better job. Every time they spill, they have to pay fines to the state, but they also have to pay fines we direct the money in these stipulated penalties to go to the Sarasota Bay Estuary program for when they do spill.
There's a comment. It says, it seems that we have many cases of overspills. Would you say that we have more than the average?
Every coastal community has its share. I'd say that probably a little better than average at this point. I mean, Bradenton was terrible. They were having a lot of spills. The city of Sarasota had been pretty bad, but they agreed to spend $300 million to upgrade their collection system, and they've been now a couple of years into that, and they've been spending a lot of money and energy to fix up their leaky system. So I think kind of probably par for the course as far as the spills we're seeing around here.
And Joan Bolt says, are there any Sarasota city laws for HOAs to create a vegetative border around the stormwater detention pond and
no
littoral plantings?
No, there aren't. I'm not aware of any laws that require that, but it's kind of exciting to see in this community HOAs and even, I'm used to suing developers and trash talking them, but you're seeing some progressive developments that are incorporating fairly innovative stormwater techniques and technologies, and a growing understanding of people that, we need to manage stormwater better and to do projects like what Joan is mentioning, creating vegetative barriers and littoral plantings. But I don't think that there are laws in place to mandate that.
Would you be the kind of person people would go to start such processes?
Probably not. I mean, that's a very complicated, lengthy process, and I think that there's halting progress being made, like with certain legislative efforts to. I mean, there are these blue-green algae task forces which are making recommendations to the governor and cabinet of ways to dial back blue-green algae and red tide nitrogen pollution. And so the idea is that these these panels make recommendations and the legislature then adopts them, but they're not adopting them. I think that, it's very much a political problem with, I believe, a legislature that's kind of captured by industry and is not friendly to environmental regulation. So I think in many ways, the key is to elect better people.
We're getting some questions here. So Eric Garduno, how do you determine what would be the right actions, whether related to the fish farm review and practices or updates being made by the municipal treatment of plants or treatment plants?
Sorry, we have a 3-year-old in the room. So how do I determine what would be the right actions? I'm a lawyer and not an engineer or an expert, but like with our sewage litigation, we hire consultants. We have this amazing consultant that, buddy, don't go outside. That he works with us and with the engineers from the municipalities and educates them about how to better manage their systems. So, I don't make this stuff up. I rely on people a lot smarter than me. When it comes to like the fish farm, the right actions, because again, I'm not really sure, but I'm pretty sure about the process. And the process is established in law that there should be full environmental impact studies, and you hire experts to look at these proposals and to come up with expert opinions about the potential environmental impacts and ways to mitigate them or ways to avoid them. So again, I turn to people that are smarter than me to educate me, and hopefully I can help to educate the public about them as well. So like with the fish farm, there might be, I think it'll come down to like, are we going to put enough conditions into that permit to make it to where it's protective enough or that we're comfortable? I couldn't hear you, Aaron.
Sorry, am I not working?
Now I can hear you.
Oh, okay. I was saying, would you mind sharing who the consultant is?
You wouldn't know me. It's a guy named Kevin Draganchuk. He's up in the Hudson Valley.
Gargantia?
Draganchuk. We work with him on sewage issues.
You'd be surprised. I love digging into who does what, where, when, and why.
So Tom asks about the spills are the result of failing infrastructure or overuse so it's both. And I failed to, there are a lot of sources of pollution, and particularly the nitrogen pollution. And, I've been focused on these sewage systems because there's laws that make it easy for me to force them to come into compliance. But I think septic systems are an important component of that. So it's failing infrastructure. It's also failing septic systems. It's our counties and municipalities kind of slowly connecting them or forcing them to then connect to central sewer, and overdevelopment for sure. I mean, overdevelopment, I think, is really more points to the stormwater pollution, not so much sewage spills, because I think generally new development has pretty good environmental infrastructure.
Did you answer the one on where, what does it say?
Oh, yeah,
Where
yeah.
the
Where's the
plant
sewage treatment
outfall-
plant outfall on the Manatee River? It's just upriver from the hospital on 9th Street, I think. North of the hospital, north of the waterfront restaurant on the Bradenton side of the river.
Just north of a restaurant?
Not north, I'm sorry, upriver, east of the restaurant in the city.
Oh.
So Damon, I'm psyched you're on. Comment, there's a lot of money coming to local governments through the federal infrastructure bill. Absolutely, and it's important to remind leaders that we need to fix our failing stormwater management systems, not just add more roads. Yeah, absolutely, and there's a lot of infrastructure money. We've been, we approach these cases, like Bradenton's a great example, where we're bringing an enforcement action and suing them, but we're really trying to partner with them to identify resources and funding as well, so that they can upgrade. But the vexing thing for me is like stormwater, because there's no like stormwater management. I don't have the tools that I have. Like if I identify a failing sewage system, they have a permit that has provisions where I can bring a lawsuit and force them to like fix it. With management of like a municipality stormwater system, I don't have like the hammer. And so, yeah, it's important to remind leaders that, like, and to get the public behind it, saying, hey, we want it. We want you to prioritize environmental infrastructure and to maintaining and upgrading your stormwater systems. And if I had like a hammer and a way of forcing them to do it, I would, but I'm searching for it. Tom, how many waterkeepers are in Florida? There's now, I believe, 13 different waterkeepers in Florida and growing. And we're starting to work collaboratively. We have calls every week. We're starting to work more and more on statewide legislative issues and really kind of sharing our expertise amongst each other.
Would you mind if I shared the information? I think I might have found Kevin.
I actually, I would rather not you share Kevin's info
Okay,
because he's
you got it.
super busy. It's not like he's our super, we just keep him so busy.
No worries. Okay. And I had a question. I don't know. Do you have any experience? I don't know. I got really into that, the fantastic fungi. And let me get focus. And I was curious, do you have any experience with marine fungi and oil spills, things like that?
I have a lot of experience with oil spills, and that's kind of what before I moved back to town, I was litigating oil spill cases up in New York, and I worked on the BP spill, I guess, while I was here. But I was doing that more, not from not the technical side.
Right.
But I was involved in a lot of oil spill cases that impacted aquifers and groundwater and property values. And then the BP spill, I was very involved in working with nonprofits, communities, and I represented a lot of private parties as well that were damaged.
And did they have any information on it being a successful countermeasure?
The fungus,
Yeah.
I don't
know that. No,
I don't know.
There was some really cool stuff on how they can use it. It breaks it down.
I just know that the dispersants that they used were a freaking nightmare.
Oh, okay.
Back after the BP spill, but they were like a toxic chemical solution.
They used a toxic chemical to help with the
To disperse.
chemical?
Yeah, to basically to disperse the oil from the surface and drop it out to the bottom or into the water column.
What can the
So-
average citizen Yeah, what can the
Yeah,
ambitious citizen do to help keep policymakers accountable to environmental regulation?
man, I just put the pressure on, let them know that you're watching. Ask them lots of questions about their position, their votes. This time of year, they're in session. Like right now, there's a bill that's going to be in front of Buchanan, James, the younger, on the proposal for seagrass mitigation, which I think is a terrible idea. Damon, we can talk about that some other time. Just be vocal. Like, read these legislators. They have open houses. They have events in the community. They, or their staff, really welcome input from their constituents, whether you vote for them or not. Let them know that how you prioritize, that you think that environmental protection, and I think that you folks who I'm talking to, I imagine you do. I appreciate the Native Plant Society and the things that you work on. Be vocal. Let them know it's important to you, because otherwise they're just going to hear from business owners and industry. And some of us are business owners too, but like, you know, they're getting one side of it, and they, like I said earlier, it's kind of harsh. And my talks are always bummers, but you know, I think the legislature for the most part is captive. It's captured by industry, polluting industry, that their marching orders are no more regulation, let us do our own thing. And that's where it's gotten us to where, you know, back to the comment, I forget what exact percentage of seagrass loss from the last measurements. It's not looking good. And we got to have some serious change quickly.
18% decline.
Yeah.
It is difficult for people to speak up, but it really does help.
Yeah, and I mean, I don't think that at the end of the day, like, these lawsuits are, I think they're really helpful. We've had a lot of impact, but you know, you can't rely on you know, waterkeepers slinging lawsuits to fix the problem.
Would you, I don't know, maybe I didn't hear it, but do you have recommendations for groups to help with the voting recommendation? Like, I don't know if we're allowed to mix it, I guess we are. But an organization that would kind of say, hey, this person is pro, you know, environment, or don't vote this.
No, I know. I mean, there are different groups. The League of Women Voters. You know, there are different scorecards. I think a great resource is Thousand Friends of Florida. They have probably the best up-to-date information on what's going on in the legislature and the voting records of some representatives. You know, whether you have connections with I don't know if the Sierra Club does like a scorecard, but they'll endorse, I think they'll endorse folks. We, Suncoast Waterkeeper, we don't do any endorsements. We're apolitical. We're a 501c3. But yeah, just try to learn as much as you can about positions and voting records. And even if you see that someone is like consistently voting against you know, the environment, just let them know that you're a constituent as well, and what is important to you. And then talk at the ballot box as well.
Well,
And get
I've
candidates to run.
Yeah, that's a good point, Cappy. It's a hard environment for good candidates to run, because they're going to get beat up, and then they look at, like, you know, okay, let's say they're successful, then they go up to Tallahassee and they're in the vast minority, and how much are they going to be able to accomplish? But you know,
My view is that people have to select a candidate they're going to support and financially make it feasible for them to run competitively. And if you know, if we have a group of people running for the same seat that you're not sure who you'll vote for, and there's various voices, it just gets diluted. We have to learn to select a significant candidate and one candidate and really back them up.
well, I look forward to seeing that candidate step up, and it's really, really important.
Well, I really want to thank you for coming here and giving us this time with you and sharing your knowledge. I've got some great notes. I think I learned some. I hope I like the question. I hope you guys all as well learned something new. And yeah, so with that, I just want to make sure that you guys are aware again that we do have that field trip coming up this Saturday. If you haven't done so already, please register. And also next month, we're going to have a presentation by Kate Bordis. She's a master naturalist. She says, don't miss this beautifully illustrated talk about good bugs and bad bugs in your garden. So that's coming up on the 21st of March. Yeah, so I don't see you all physically. Some of our videos are still not on, but I miss seeing your faces. And so soon one day, hopefully we can all see each other again in real life. Until then, I hope you have a wonderful day. And thank you again, Mr. Bloom, for being with us today. I hope you guys have a great night. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, Justin.
Thank you.
Thanks, Damon, for the plug. I appreciate that in the chat. Yeah, we really appreciate financial support, especially we're about to hire an executive director. It's a big step for us, and we want to make sure that we can continue to.
No, it's my pleasure to do that, and I figured you probably wouldn't, but it's I work kind of in a similar field, more for like the government side, and I'm in the consulting side now, but I've always kind of been so incredibly grateful that Justin and Waterkeeper is there doing what they're doing, because sometimes it comes to that, and that's where action starts to happen. So I genuinely appreciate all you do, and hope everybody else can look at that and recognize that you're not doing it for free either. So all this stuff takes money to hire consultants to pay for the sampling. So if you can help that, please do.
Thanks, Damon. Really appreciate it. Well, thank you all. Nice talking with you.